affiliated bands, including the Kayaya, as well as the Carrizo Come Crudo and Laikan Apache, who migrated and moved into and through this region. And we're just across the street from one of the life-giving springs that brought people here for millennia, the San Pedro Springs, and it has long been a sacred place and a gathering place. I've been working in and alongside cultural organizations and with artists for going on 2 decades now. And in the last 4 years since I came back to San Antonio, I've had the pleasure of working with several of our panelists tonight, and some of you in the audience. And for those that I have not previously worked with, I have long admired and followed your work. And I just am so appreciative of our speakers tonight for the energy and the care with which they approach this conversation. And I hope that we as the audience can approach our participation with that same care and respect. Because they will be sharing experiences tonight, and because the speakers have arrived at this moment at no small cost to themselves and to their communities. And I want to take a moment to share a time when, in contrast, I actually experienced an absence of many of the barriers that they're going to be exploring today, and a freedom to create and present. And at the time, I was at El Museo in East Harlem, and I started a performing arts residency program in our Black Box Theater there. And our first artist in residence was Antonio Ramos, a queer Puerto Rican choreographer who was based in New York. And actually the first time that I saw him perform was at the Bronx Academy of Art and Dance, BAD, an organization much like Esperanza, which was a space for artists to create and experiment, and a stage, a platform, and a home for queer artists, for Black and Latinx artists, and for women. So we're doing the residency, it's going along. We decided to organize a studio showing, and so we invited, El Museo's leadership, some funders, colleagues in the field, and I guess what today you would call influencers. And so everybody started arriving at 10 a.m. on a weekday morning, and I remember it was the winter because Antonio wanted natural light. And so we had pulled back the blackout curtains in the Black Box Theater, and that crisp morning light was coming in. And the performance began, and the dancers entered completely naked. 5 or 6 dancers, men and women, all different kinds of body types, bathed in this beautiful winter morning light. And to be sure, some of the people in that audience were uncomfortable. And we were all in this very intimate space because this was a flex space, so we had just put the marley down on the floor. There was no stage at a higher level, and the audience wasn't on tiered seats. So we were all there together on the same plane, sharing this experience. And it was a success, and we understood that the vulnerability of those dancers' naked bodies and the power of those bodies moving through their space wasn't gratuitous. It was core to Antonio's vision and his intent as an artist. And we went on to produce that on the main stage as a ticketed public event. And everything was great. Everything went really well. And so you're saying, Stephanie, okay, I don't know why you're telling me this story. I'm so glad everything went great for you and Antonio. I'm glad you got to produce everything and that nobody complained. And I say this in part because we were able to produce that program because of the artists and activists who founded El Museo. And because of the women like the speakers that you will see today who have been fighting to be able to have that freedom as artists and presenters for decades. And I also share it because it was one of the most formative experiences in my career. And I'm so thankful to have had that trust and respect and to be able to pass that on to the artists and to build that into our residency program. And it has informed my work ever since. And so I share this story so that we can hold the space for the possibility of something more as we hear from our speakers tonight. For the possibility of that artistic freedom that does in fact exist here in San Antonio and organizations and spaces all over the city. For the possibility that the artists can create and present without the constraint of fear, and that audiences have the ability to be challenged and to be uncomfortable. And so I'll close with a quote from an article that I recently read by Tasha Golden, and it was actually about arts and health. But I think because I was thinking about this panel, the connections were very clear. And she writes, "Art is often provocative, cutting, tragic, and challenging. Sometimes our engagement with art is less about alleviating a difficult experience than it is accompanying or articulating it. In other words, art doesn't exist merely to make us feel good, yet humans have long looked to art to help us be well. And my hope is that the same can be said for tonight's conversation. And I want to thank the Esperanza Peace and Justice Center and Sarah Hart for making that possible, and for tonight's speakers, Kathy Armstrong, Norma Cantu, Sarah Fox, Suzy González, and Graciela Sánchez for making it powerful in the deepest sense of the word. And so please join me in welcoming Dr. Norma Cantu to the stage. She is the Noreen R. and Frank T. Murchison Distinguished Professor of Humanities, Languages and Literatures at Trinity University. She was a senior arts administrator with the National Endowment for the Arts in Washington, D.C., and I think we'll be hearing a little bit about that tonight, and was acting chair of the Chicano Studies Research Center at the University of California in Santa Barbara. She has published articles on a number of academic subjects, and her teaching interests include folklore, creative writing, cultural studies, contemporary literary theory, border studies, Chicano and Latino literatures. And she has co-edited and edited over 20 books, and we are so thankful to have her here tonight. So please join me in welcoming her to the stage.
Thank you so much. Muchísimas gracias. Buenas tardes, buenas noches. I would like to begin by acknowledging my ancestors and our ancestors who made it possible for us to be here, and asking their permission to do the work we're about to do. Yes, I was at the NEA. I was there in the mid-90s when Newt Gingrich was out to destroy the NEA. And I do remember the tension and the fear that all of us in the arts communities, not just in DC, but everywhere in the country, were feeling at the time. I kind of hoped that it would pass, and indeed it did. Unfortunately, it was never really gone. It's still there, and frequently it rears its ugly head, not just at the national level, but also in communities across this country. The banning of books, the banning of art, of creativity is not new. It's been around for a long time. Mostly it has been around because of fear. Fear of three things, or from three things. One is fear of losing control, of not letting people do what they need to do. And the control that the powers that be, especially government agencies and others, can wield a lot of power. And so they're afraid of losing power. The second is the fear of change. Whenever things are not comfortable, not the way we've always done it, there's fear. The greatest challenge is to overcome the fear and go forward. And that, I think, is two ways. The artists are sometimes afraid and self-censor because of what may happen. But on the other hand, those who control what the artist can and cannot produce are also afraid of that. So that to me is a big one, the fear of change. And I always tell my students, especially the creative writing students, just be bold, break it down, go there. Go where you don't think you should go. That's where you need to go. And the third is the fear of the unknown, of what's new. It's much more comfortable to reside in a neighborhood where you know everybody, everything's fine. Much easier to live in a house where you can walk around in the dark and know where things are. Not so easy if it's new or different. And so that takes courage to be able to go there. And artists do that. But not necessarily the government or the powers that be. In my experience, and I just kind of very briefly, I told Graciela when I was invited to participate here that I don't really know. I'm not an art historian. I'm not a cultural critic or an art critic. But I do have a vested interest in the discussion tonight. And that is the way that women are silenced, not just in our community, but everywhere. That's one. The other is that I do dabble in art. I have a couple of books where I've edited essays by art historians, one on Liliana Wilson, another one on Rolando Briceño, and then I worked also on Santa Barraza's book. So I do have, como dicen, no es chango en mecate ajeno entirely, because I do feel like I have some say-so. the other thing that I wanted to kind of focus on is the kind of censorship. Right now, we're having a major crisis with books. And I know you've been reading about it. The school districts that are banning books, the committees or the state kind of guardians of what textbooks get into the schools are really after anything that has to do with what they don't even understand is critical race theory. Many of them have never even read critical race theory, and yet they're attacking it. Anything that has to do with LGBTQ topics, anything that has to do with any acknowledgement of slavery, those are the ones that are being targeted. Our own school districts here in the area are going through that as well. And so it's not just the artists, and it's also the books. And that to me is critical. As a writer, we want to write and with the freedom that we should. We want to create. The spaces where this happens, universities, museums, publishing houses, any one of these and others, that's where the kind of guardians are. They're the ones that are the gatekeepers. In publishing, often it's the publishers. They don't want to publish something because it's too radical or too inciting to riots or whatever the term is that they're using now. On the other hand, editors also are at blame. They're the ones that are kind of monitoring what gets published. Similarly, as for art, it is the curators and the spaces, the museums, like the one we're going to discuss tonight. And also cultural centers that are attacked because they are the safe spaces. BAD, I'm glad that you mentioned BAD. My good friend Charles is now head of that. And it's the Bronx, and it's an incredible space. El Museo is an incredible space. Esperanza is an incredible space, precisely because that's where artists find a home, a safe space. And it's a safe space only because people have the courage to make it so. It wasn't always like that. So the cultural centers can be defunded, and I think Graciela is going to talk about that a little bit. But it also can be, in some ways, self-censoring. And there are many spaces where the mission and the vision of that space says it's one thing, and the action is different. So those of us who are involved, either board members or even just audience, need to hold those spaces accountable and make sure that they are indeed doing that work. It's not easy. It's very difficult to do the work. It's also risky because of the forces that are trying to stop the work from happening. I'm going to close. I only had a few minutes to get up here and kind of frame the discussion tonight. Each one of the speakers is going to come at it from different ways, but I did want to show some images, and I was supposed to have the clicker up here, but I don't see it.
Well, it wasn't working, so we're going to do it from back.
Oh, okay. So, because I wanted to show you some images that at one time were very controversial and created such dissent. One is Esther Hernandez's image that was on the cover of Chicana Lesbians, The Girls Our Mothers Warned Us About, published by Third Woman Press under Norma Cantu's editorship, and how controversial that was at the time, not only for the press, but also for Esther. She was a school teacher at the time. And so much so, there was such backlash that the press chose a different cover in the next edition, and that's the one you see on the right. And you can see how it's not the same. And the next image is also about the Virgen de Guadalupe, because sacred images are sometimes the ones that are at the heart of controversy. The one on the left is the image by Alma Lopez that was shown at an exhibit on the Virgen de Guadalupe in New Mexico at the Hispanic Cultural Center, and created huge problems, both for the museum, the curator, Tay Nunn, and for the artist. The result, because of their courage, was a book that instead of just succumbing to it, they took that as empowering and created something beautiful. The book is Our Lady of Controversy, where artists and writers meditated, wrote about the event, And really, if you have a chance, read the essays. They are an amazing testament to the power of people just believing in artistic freedom and artistic creation. And the last one, that's another one that was controversial, obviously, because it's using two images that are at the heart of many of our cultural assumptions as Chicanas. The La Sirena from the Loteria game that we all know, and of course the Virgen de Guadalupe. But the homoeroticism that is going on, it was the problem. So even though there's no words saying anything, it's the image that is controversial. And I see artists here in the audience that are doing some of this incredible work, and I just applaud you. And I'm going to end with a quote from Gloria Anzaldúa: "Do work that matters, vale la pena." Thank you.
Thank you. This is such a local conversation tonight that we wanted to have Dr. Cantu open it up for us a little bit and pull back the lens, because it's not just here in San Antonio, so we appreciate that. I'm going to introduce our moderator for tonight. Kathy Armstrong is an expert in art and women's healthcare nonprofit sectors. She contributes to the culture and civic identity of San Antonio through participation in panels, jurors, and committees, and has been a long-serving board member for Planned Parenthood South Texas. And in fact, her and Sarah were on another panel last week, so they've had a lot of chance to talk together. Excuse me. She was most recently contracted by ArtPay San Antonio as their interim director for residencies and exhibitions, and served as the executive director of Luminaria for over 5 years, where she was responsible for producing the Luminaria Contemporary Art Festival and overseeing an artist grant program. And prior to that, she was served as the director of exhibitions for the Southwest School of Art. So she has been in many of our institutions here in San Antonio, and we're grateful for having her here tonight.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. Yes, I've been here for over 25 years. So originally from the East Coast, from Philadelphia, but San Antonio has become my home. I raised my family here, and my family has also been in the arts. So I've been working for the arts for many years, and also for women's health issues. Our two openings were so beautiful. Thank you so much, Norma, for that introduction and for giving us a space and a safe space. And tonight will be introducing the panelists so they can give you their experiences, their stories. And I did have the fortune of speaking with each of them independently, and their stories are very serious and very heartfelt, and what they have gone through is something to be given respect and honor. So I just want to thank them for the time I had with them previous to this, and I hope you enjoyed tonight. We have an artist, a curator, and a director, so you'll hear from different perspectives. The evening is focused a little bit strongly in visual arts. I know that this must happen in every art form. Writing, it happens in opera, it happens in dance, but tonight we are focused on visual arts, and I hope more discussions will happen that will broaden the reach to other art forms. So first, in reverse chronological order, I'm going to introduce each artist, and each artist will then have a chance to talk about their experience. And then after that, we will have a dialogue here at the table between the different panelists, and then we will end it with some questions from the audience. So it's my pleasure to introduce Sarah Fox. Sarah Fox lives and works in San Antonio. There we go. So Sarah Fox lives and works in San Antonio with her 4-year-old son, and she is a resident artist at Clamplight Studios and Gallery. She teaches at Texas State University and runs a summer nature art camp for young artists at Confluence Park. Sarah's work has been shown throughout Texas, as well as at the Kinsey Institute in Indiana, Field Projects Gallery, New York, Casa Lu in Mexico City. She is a recipient of the Sustainable Arts Foundation grant and an individual artist grant from the city of San Antonio, which we might hear about. In Sarah Fox's art, the multimedia narratives and characters are created from embodied female experiences, Stories of life, loss, sex, and love are told through corporal hybrid creatures. The resulting collages, cyanotypes, and video works suggest a childlike fairy tale, but with an undercurrent of dark symbolism. So Sarah, you were recently uninvited or censored from participating in an exhibition at a private institution, the McNay Museum. Can you share the structure, timeline, and negotiations of your experience in creating and showcasing your video? And perhaps a little bit about this video that upset the balance of comfort, as we've heard about.
Yes, okay. Hi, thank you guys so much for coming and supporting everyone, and thank you so much for the Esperanza Center for hosting this discussion. So I'm just going to go over the timeline of kind of what happened, and I can talk a little bit more about my motivations behind the work later in the discussion. But the timeline was in December of 2020. I was invited to participate in an exhibition at the McNay Museum of Art. The concept was to pair, at the time it started out with 9, it went down to 8, 9 local San Antonio artists, and we were supposed to respond to a piece of work in the original McNay bequest. So we got to see her bequest, we got to go back and look at all the art. I chose a piece by the printmaker Ketakolvitz. It was the thing that spoke to me the most because the piece was called Woman with Crossed Hands. And it was this very tired, anxious looking working class woman kind of hunched over. And I think especially after COVID, I just felt for her and I had a lot of empathy for her. And those are the kind of characters that were filling my work at the time. So that was what I chose to respond to. A few months later, we came back with ideas for the McNay, and we met with the curators there, and I proposed 3 ideas for them. One of the ideas was a direct correlation between a printmaker, and I chose to do 3 lithographs, or I proposed to do 3 lithographs, kind of like drawings like the one behind me. The second proposal I gave them was to do a quilt. I do quilts. I wanted to do a quilt about being a single mom and sort of a working class mom, like the Ketakolvitz woman in the piece. The third proposal I gave them was to do a puppet show. At the time, I'd already created one puppet show. It was on display at Blue Star Contemporary. The puppet show dealt with addiction. It dealt with issues of sexuality. It dealt with being a working class person. It was dark, it was sexual. This rabbit is all by herself, sort of lonely, drinking and gyrating to music, and she passes out drunk at the end of the. So there was nothing family friendly about the work that they saw. And they chose the puppet show. So I knew the puppet show was going to be the hardest piece to go with because I have to work with collaborators on the puppet shows. But I was excited that I felt like they understood what I was trying to do with my work. And so we went forward with the puppet show. Okay. Then I worked for about a year on this. And in July of 2021, I presented them with a bunch of drawings. So the way I work as an artist is I make sort of, I like to create worlds where we can talk about important issues. And to build the worlds, I kind of create ephemera around them. So drawings, cyanotypes, little sculptures, things like that. And then the final product is often like a video work or a puppet show or something like that. So I showed them this drawing, the drawing that was before. And it was called Bad Bunny Gets Lucky, and it was a sort of post-coital exhausted rabbit, like laying on the bed with her like fox behind her has a really nice butt. And they liked it, and they said that the drawings were beautiful that I showed them. So I kept going. I started building prototypes for the new puppet. I had the rabbit puppet already. I wanted to create this male character that was like this kind of ragged silver fox guy. And puppetry takes some prototypes. So I did some prototypes, and I showed them the kind of final prototype for the puppet in September of 2021. Of course, when I got to like puppet a character, and it was a male character, I gave him a working penis, and I demonstrated that in one of the meetings. I should stop and say that I like to approach important, tough issues with a sense of humor, because I think it makes it more accessible to people. I like to make things campy, but still serious. So I showed them the working fox penis. Everybody was on board. So the install date was February 28th of 2022. In early February, we were asked to give them a list of the works that would be included in the McNay, and I showed them the puppet show. It was almost completely done. All we had left to do, JJ's in the audience, he did the sound for the video. We had to do some sound edits, and we had to do some color edits, and that was all that was left. It took 4 people working on this video for almost a year to finish it. At that time, I sent them that edit, or the almost done video, and I got an email on February 2nd saying there was a content concern about my work, and I was like, oh no. It was right after the freeze happened, so I couldn't go in person, which was kind of, I'm thankful for, because I don't know what would have happened if I had had to listen to what happened in person. Luckily, it was on Zoom. Some of the things that were relayed to me in that first meeting was that at the McNay, they really wanted art that lived in an airplane mode. And what is an airplane mode? An airplane mode is art where everything potentially offensive is cut out of it. They even went so far to say, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being some very controversial work, I'm thinking like Annie Sprinkle or something like that, and a 1 being, a sunset painting of a cowboy or something like that. That the McNay was aiming for a 5. They had never told me this. This was never expressed in any of the meetings I had gone to. If it had been, I would not have participated. That's not the kind of work that I make. I make work that directly responds to what's going on in the world around me. And I'm living in Texas, and I'm angry about the laws that are being placed upon our bodies, and LGBTQ bodies, and trans bodies. That was the work I was making. Okay, I suggested at this meeting that they put the work behind a curtain or make a small room for the work with a content warning. I get it that it can be triggering and not everybody wants to see sex, even if they're adorable puppets having sex. So we discussed, and we made an agreement to have a meeting the next day. I was still optimistic at this point and thought that the next day they would come back and be like, okay, we're gonna just do the curtain, it'll be fine. That's really what I thought. And the next day we had another Zoom meeting, and they refused to do the curtain or the room, even though they've done curtains and rooms for many other video works at the McNay. The suggestions I was given were to show old work. I live in this city. I'm a huge participant in the art community here. Everybody's seen my old work, and it wasn't work that was made for the times we were living in, so it felt I didn't want to show old work. The other suggestions were to show a welcoming tableau of the fully clothed puppets hanging and eating dinner together. The final suggestion I was given was to make a new body of work in 2 weeks. I work full-time, I'm a mom. Me planning out this video took a whole year of planning to make it happen. There was no way I could make a new work for them in 2 weeks. They specifically suggested a shadow puppet theater that focused about the grounds of the Marion Kugler McNay Museum. I'm supposed to wrap it up. Okay, so at that time I let the other artists know what was happening, and 5 other artists stood behind me and emailed the museum saying that if my work was uninvited, that they would not be participating. And they were amazing. And I think if it hadn't been for them, I would have just kind of been silent and shown my work elsewhere, but it was because all these other artists came together behind me that I was able to be so vocal about it. February 10th is the in-person meeting, and I want to say that I have not been slut-shamed by a group of people like this in a really long time, and it was painful to go through. February 11th, I was uninvited, and the other artists were also uninvited. And the McNay immediately contacted the media without giving the other artists a chance to respond. February 12th, I made a public post, and I emailed the McNay asking for a direct written response to why I was uninvited from the exhibition. And then the newspaper and the articles all happened. And in the newspaper, I want to say it was the first time I heard that the reason I was uninvited was for not following a prompt. So that was never expressed to me in any of the meetings. Okay, and now I'm done talking about it.
And you won't get to talk about it more. So, it's my pleasure now to introduce Suzy González. Suzy is an artist, curator, writer, and zinester based in Yanaguana, aka San Antonio. She's a member of the Breathe Collective and does Chicanx. Okay, I'm still from Philadelphia. Suzy co-organizes the San Antonio Zine Fest and publishes the Chicana Vegan Zine. She is currently a writer on the creative team of Veggie Mijas and an arts consultant and editor for Ofrenda magazine. Suzy is an alum of the NALAC Leadership Institute and the Intercultural Leadership Institute and the NIFA Immigrant Artist Mentoring Program. She has also attended the Center for Artistic Activism. Suzy González is the recipient of the Individual Artist Grant from the City of San Antonio and a grant from the Culture and Animals Foundation. She has completed public art projects within the City of San Antonio, for the city itself, with the San Antonio Street Art Initiative, Centro San Antonio, the San Antonio Museum of Art, and the City of Pasadena in Texas. She holds an MFA from the Rhode Island School of Design and a BFA from Texas State University. Suzy.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Sarah.
Suzy, your situation is different in that you were curating an exhibition in a City of San Antonio space. That exhibition you had co-curated, Chicanx New Visions, was called into question for another powerful video by artist Sandra Ibarra. It was also censored and excluded, probably for more powerful work about sexuality. Can you share your experience with us?
Yes, I'm going to read transparency. Okay. Artists should be able to make work in the lineage of our ancestors about who we are in our personal and political experiences, and we should be able to share and uplift those creative visions with our community with funding and without limitation. Artists have constitutionally protected freedoms of speech and expression, but they are often casually revoked in an effort to appeal to conservatives in power. We live on land that was violently colonized and continues to be, and we see it in our communities through gentrification, poverty, and incarceration. And in the arts, a seemingly liberatory space, we also see it through a lack of representation, institutionalized white supremacy, erasure, silencing, defunding, and censorship. Chicanx New Visions was an exhibition created by Dos Mesticex, now Dos Chicanx, the collective duo of myself and Michael Menchaca, and opened February 13th, 2020 at Centro de Artes. It was a national exhibit spanning contemporary artists whose work is tied to social justice, identity and experience, and a transcendence of borders. The artworks included in the show challenged previous and existing surveys of Chicano and Latin American identity-based exhibitions. The day before the exhibit opened, it was decided that the video work of Sandra Ibarra would not be installed in the Lupa videos to be exhibited in Centro de Arte's video room. Her work, Spectacle 2, La Tortillera, was deemed obscene content by City Attorney Andy Segovia. Upon learning this, director Debbie Rockesitter told us that she supported us and would fight this fight with us. The claims of obscenity come from Texas Penal Code 43, in which it also states that to be considered obscene, the content taken as a whole must lack serious artistic value. Ibarra identifies as a queer, anti-carceral feminist of color. She's an Oakland-based artist from the US-Mexico border of El Paso and Juarez, and her work addresses the borders between racialized, gendered, and queer subjects. I shouldn't have to list her accomplishments to illustrate the level of respect that she and her work deserve, but I will. As one of the more established artists in the exhibit, she's been featured at the Contemporary Art Museum in Colombia, the Broad Museum in LA, Exteresa Arte Actual in Mexico, the Leslie Lohman Museum in New York City, and the Anderson Collection at Stanford, to name a few. She served as a professor at San Francisco Art Institute, California College of the Arts, San Francisco State, and this year she's teaching at Stanford University. There's no doubt that her work and her practice have serious artistic value. During the months surrounding the censorship, we as curators faced a barrage of unpaid labor, a lack of support from respected elders, little time to work on our actual practices, a constant need to defend our actions and standing up for the rights of artists, and overwhelming feelings of unappreciation by the city that we love. Censorship is trauma, and it's those who become traumatized who become responsible for changing things as consultants of controversy. We need everyone to voice how wrong it is to deny the freedoms of speech and expression for BIPOC, LGBTQAI+, gender nonconforming, and women artists. There was also a great deal of support. We created a petition that got over 1,300 signatures. Sandra Ibarra's network wrote a letter of support with signatures of scholars, including renowned philosopher Judith Butler. Local, national, and international press covered the story. We received support from the mayor's LGBTQ+ advisory committee and the National Coalition Against Censorship. With the help of Graciela Sánchez and Amy Castley, we attended meetings where we spoke out on the wrongdoings of the city and its representatives. We simply asked for the work to be installed as it was reviewed, confirmed, and intended, and compromised with the suggestion of hanging a curtain in front from the video room with the viewer discretion sign. The decision came to the Centro de Artes Committee, who voted unanimously for the video to be installed in the exhibit with the curtain and sign as requested. The director, city manager, and city attorney decided to ignore these recommendations, and it should be known that this committee is made up entirely of Latina experts who work in arts and cultures. So in addition to Sandra Ibarra, they too were silenced. The decision then went to the Arts Commission, and in an unorthodox meeting lacking any real debate, they revoked their own power and decided that the decision should be singularly left up to the director, Debbie Rockesitter, who conclusively chose for it to never be exhibited. Artists and curators are expected to abide by city contracts and loan agreements. Contracts happen behind closed doors in email inboxes and are rarely disputed. It should also be known that in these agreements, the city is grammatically referred to as an actual person. However, it notes that the city was acting by and through its executive director of the Department of Arts and Culture, then Debbie Rockesitter, and now interim director Crystal Jones. One person should not have that much power. Now I'm going to quote some of the language that permits censorship that artists must agree with and sign off on in order to exhibit their work at this space, Centro de Artes. So here we go. Okay, before the censorship of Sandra Ibarra, the artist loan agreement read, "City reserves the right to remove, relocate, and or cover the artworks anytime during the exhibition period if the space becomes obligated for another service or if city determines the exhibition is not in the best interest of city." After the censorship of her work and for the first exhibit to return in the space, which is now up, the artist loan agreement reads similarly, but extra language has been included to allow for the artwork to never be installed. This is not a coincidence, but a direct action that allows the city to never install an artwork that's been created into the exhibition space. The opening reception of Chicanx New Visions combined with the commemorative exhibit Los Maestros, Early Explorers of Chicano Identity, was the most attended opening in the history of the Centro de Artes space. When the pandemic hit, both exhibits were forced to close, the catalog printings and releases were canceled, and so were the panel talks associated with them. The city was also going to erase Sandra Ibarra from the catalog, so we decided to include her work in it and to publish the catalog online ourselves. So, why is it that there are continuous acts against artists, curators, and art administrators in this region? Imbalances of power have a select few making important decisions about the livelihood of creatives. Who is this meant to cater to? Who thinks that brown women empowering their own queer sexuality is obscene? The fearful conservative Christian right? White supremacist systems that have governed this land for far too long? Those in power, AKA not women of color or culture, in order to preserve their power? And who still have the power to keep BIPOC, queer, and women artists in their limiting white boxes? Queerness is nothing new. The indigenous descendants of Chicanx folks practice a variety of sexual and gender expressions, and an attack on queer sexuality is an attack on our culture and ancestry. This has shown the homophobia of the city of San Antonio, and it's not a good look for us. Continuing to cater to white cis hetero male identities does not encompass the people on this land and is an embarrassment to our city, stunting our development and preventing serious consideration of the art by the rest of the world. Art challenges these values and moves culture forward. We need to hold the individuals making these decisions accountable. It's time the city grows their understanding of contemporary art, listens to the needs of artists, and works to align their values with the diverse, creative, and cultural city that we are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suzy. That was fabulous. It's now my pleasure to introduce Graciela Sánchez, who everybody must know because this is the Esperanza Center. Graciela Isabella Sánchez follows in the footsteps of her mother and abuelitas, strong neighborhood women of color, cultural workers, and activists of San Antonio. As a Buena Gente, aka director of the Esperanza Peace and Justice Center, a community-based cultural arts social justice organization, Graciela works with staff and community to develop programs that are culturally grounded, working class, and poor people of color. Queer people, women, individuals who are survivors of cultural genocide. Graciela Sánchez challenges notions of arts and politics as separate work environments, leading the vision and the operations of Esperanza as a community center, art exhibition and performance space, policy change hub, and network facilitator for social justice, environmental, and community-based arts organizations. With guidance from the community, Graciela is helping to found the first community museum in San Antonio, the Museo del West Side. Welcome, Graciela. Graciela, we are going back in time, but your organization, the Esperanza Peace and Justice Center, suffered from a surprise attack from outside entities that resulted first in your organization being cut from City of San Antonio arts funding, and second, to a federal court case when you challenged it and won. As that conflict was in the late 1990s, could you share with our audience how your organization was suppressed?
Well, thank you for Stephanie for helping Sarah Hart put this together, and thank you all for your amazing work. And back in 1997, the Esperanza was fully defunded by the City of San Antonio. Now, I was talking to Jonathan a couple of weeks ago, and he didn't know this history at all about the Esperanza getting defunded. How many of you know about that moment? So less than half of the community here. And I think that's important to tell our stories, right? Because we quickly forget, and when it affects us, we think it's the first time it happened. But we weren't the first ones either, right? I have an image of Gloria Anzaldúa here, and obviously this is not herself, but back in the 80s, Esperanza, well, let me backtrack. The vision of the Esperanza has been centered on the theories of queer women of color, like Gloria Anzaldúa, like Barbara Smith, like Audre Lorde, like Cherie Moraga, who have been talking about intersectionality at least, 40, 50 years ago when they were writing. And we talk about it today, again, as if it's a new idea, but they were talking about it then. So we have queer women of color writing this in the late 70s and the early 80s, but our theories also came from our abuelitas, our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers, who also taught us much about how to live and be in this world. And part of that vision was being honest. It was also about being truthful. It was about vivir, right? To be in community with one another. And it was about loving and giving. So bring those elements together and you create an Esperanza. And we also were coming to the creation of this organization in the late 80s, but in response also to a moment in history where we had at that time 7 years of Ronald Reagan, who was I thought he was the worst that was going to happen. We've since seen that we have had other presidents who have beat him. But on the other hand, we also knew that the policies that he was enacting at that time were going to affect us 20 and 30 years later. And yeah, no wonder we had Trump in power. But we were queer women of color that had gone away to school and come back and said, we want to make San Antonio our city, but we're against war, and we're against the militarization of our country. And yet here we were living in Military City, USA, and we were supporting all the wars in Central America, and we were training at Lackland Air Force Base brown little people, men who would go down to Guatemala, El Salvador, Peru, and places like that to kill people just like ourselves, our own brothers and sisters, and it just didn't make sense. And there were wars, and there was apartheid in South Africa, and we were saying no to apartheid in South Africa. And yet when I came back home and I worked at a civil rights organization, they weren't interested in the international. It was just like, this is all about domestic civil rights. And when I looked at the cultural centers and the museums, we weren't there, right? And it was, even in the cultural centers of color, it was still 95% men of color. And it's like, well, where are the women? And where are the queer people? Where are the lesbians? I was like an out lesbian, and I couldn't find other allies at all. And so it's like, okay, it's good to have these institutions, but we need to create something else. So that's where the Esperanza comes from. And so immediately, we're going to have an exhibit, right? All right, what are those exhibits? So, one of them was human rights, blah, 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 blah. But it was about Central America. And then David Zamora Casas comes up to me and says, I want to have a show, and it's going to be a human rights show. And it's like, okay, we just had one. And it's like, well, are you talking, lesbian, gay, bisexual? We didn't use the word trans at that time. He said, yes. I said, well, then let's do that. But I want all of the artists to know that they have to be out, because we're going to take it to the press, and we don't want people to be scared, and we don't want them to be, lose their jobs or whatever. So please be honest and open and let folks, because we're going to publicize their names. And like, okay, do it. But even before that, there was an exhibit. He came to us because he had seen that we had done the first AIDS exhibit, probably not just in San Antonio, but in the state of Texas. And this was a straight artist, Mim Charlak, Jewish straight woman, but she had gone throughout the whole city looking to see who could help her put together that show. And she finally got to Kathy Vargas at the Guadalupe, and she said, go to the Esperanza, they'll help you put this exhibit up. And what was amazing was, it was a Wednesday afternoon at 5:30. The place was packed with, 300-400 people. It's like, oh my God. And everybody, it's like, we've never had an exhibit like this. We need to be seen. And that's why when we did the first LGBT exhibit, same thing, lots and lots of people. So we were speaking to an audience that hadn't had themselves seen positively portrayed or complicatedly portrayed, right, by themselves, by artists from San Antonio. We immediately caused trouble with the Esperanza, the owners of the Esperanza at that time, the Oblate priest, who told us to follow the teachings of the Catholic Church. So I said, well, they're gay priests, and there are nuns who support choice, and so, we expanded that notion, and they kept us there for 4 or 5 years, and then after the 5th annual Lesbian Gay Art Exhibit, we got pushed out, which is a good opportunity, because then we found this place, and it was an opportunity for us to say to the community, help us find a place and help us buy a space, because we will always get kicked out. Not just because of our LGBT stuff, Okay, but because of the vision that we have. And so again, it's LGBT, but it's also women, it's also feminist women, it's also environmental justice, it's anti-clan, it's also bringing Black, brown, Asian, Arab, Native people together. So it's all of those. And so finally, you saw this image, this is on our 30th anniversary, but we had continued to bring in all these queer artists, but it wasn't just about that. But in 1996, 95, 96, as we were talking about issues of cultural diversity and funding for community cultural arts organizations, that we started getting attacked, both by the right wing, James Leininger, the dollars that helped to create charter schools, the dollars that helped to to elect George Bush as governor and then president. He helped to support the defunding of the Esperanza, San Antonio Right to Life, all funded, and also with queer conservative white men. They joined forces to defund the Esperanza. And sadly, when we were getting defunded, it was hard because a lot of these people that knew that we were under attack, this is a time that faxes were going back and forth, right? So faxes were going to Austin, to the state of Texas, because we also received Texas Commission on the Arts funding. And so at the local level, we got defunded, even though we had ranked first in our division within the arts department, and it was a second-year grant, so you automatically get a second grant, but we got defunded. And again, it was a big scandal. But when we needed support from other cultural centers and other artists, they were afraid. We had a little, red badge that we wanted everybody to wear, and they wore it until they went inside, and they did, because they were afraid. Where is solidarity? So I clap when you had those artists supporting you, because it was hard to get other artists and arts organizations to support us. And we were even told that out at the movies, the lesbian gay art exhibit, they were told, don't align yourself with the Esperanza. We'll support LGBT film festivals, but not at the Esperanza. Because again, we were supporting Planned Parenthood, but there were very few folks doing that. There weren't queer people that were out, so it was very difficult. And yeah, we lost the money. We had to file a lawsuit. It was a 4-year campaign, but we finally won the lawsuit and won $500,000 from the city of San Antonio. And so yeah, it was a federal case, and we also, part of it, and this will be the end, it was to make sure that they could never defund. It wasn't about individual artists, but defund any arts organization for their point of view, right? Because that was it. We've challenged the 14th Amendment, the point of view, equal protection point of view, and the First Amendment, and then the Texas Open Meetings Act, because they made all their decisions behind closed doors, midnight. You could see the city council members all talking to each other, but they didn't do that publicly. And in front of council, they just said $0 to the Esperanza, but they didn't explain anything. And they cut all the arts organizations by 20%. So they aren't allowed to do that anymore. And we succeeded at least with the cultural groups, but not necessarily the individual artists.
All right, so we have some very powerful stories here at this table. I want to bring us back to a part of censorship that might begin in ourselves, something that's ingrained, that's systemic. So where does censorship of women begin? Self-restricting creativity? Does it begin with that restriction to access to funding, to schooling, organizational practices? Sarah, I'm going to give this one to you to start off with. But where does censorship of women begin?
So I guess I talked a little bit more broadly than specifically women. I think I'm someone that works with young people. I work with young artists all summer. I've worked at what was the Southwest School of Art for years with young artists. I think self-censorship begins really young with students because the government, media, capitalism is telling us and them, because kids are smart and they pick up on this stuff, what is or isn't desirable or acceptable. And kids innately know when they're made to feel different. Some of the bills that are happening right now in Florida, the Don't Say Gay bill, Dan Patrick's trying to bring it here to Texas. And it makes me so mad and very sad for these kids. It uses fear, shame, and erasure to make people quieter and smaller. And by passing bills like this, we're teaching kids that they're wrong, that their families are wrong, the people that they love are wrong. And it innately promotes self-censorship because kids feel like they can't use their full voices, and that sort of trauma, I think, takes years to heal from, if you ever do heal from it. So there's that innate fear. Norma talked about fear at the very beginning of this. Censorship starts with fear, but then it also creates fear in the heart of people to be able to be their selves safely. To talk about my own work and self-censorship, I specifically wanted to challenge the history of the female nude in art history. I think that museums are churches for white men's desires, often. And I kind of started simply by wanting to make drawings that pushed back against that. So I would take my own body and turn it into this crazy rabbit character and insert it into images of male desire. I would insert bodies that I found desirable into some of these images so that the drawings were a direct result of my desire. And the whole time I was doing this, in the back of my head, I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna get in so much trouble for this. But I think I like being naughty, and so it kind of provoked me to like keep making them. But we all kind of saw how that ended with my work being censored by the McNay. So I think I did have that self-censorship, but I was able to push through it, but it still ended up getting shut down by a community in power, or a private museum in power.
I'm going to quote another contract. Okay, so Sarah and I were both, we got the individual artist grant by the city this year, and I'm real glad to have gotten it, and like there's all that, right? But I'm going to just, a little part of that contract that we signed, also tied to the city, right, vaguely reads that all works produced or curated as applicable under the agreement must be suitable for general audiences and people of all ages. And we had a meeting in the beginning with everyone who received it, and there was a lot of concern about that. And I think it encourages self-censorship, one to doubt one's practice, apolitical or asexual expressions, or that fear that you're going to do something and then you're going to get in trouble with whoever. Plus, the idea of general audiences is super subjective, right? That's not a literal thing in writing. And in reality, when we look at this city, right, general audiences are Latinx folks. Like we are the majority. Plus, queerness, things like that, right? Other identity markers should not be removed from the idea of what is general or typical or a status quo. So there were a lot of concerns. The concerns were kind of deflected. I don't know if you felt that. Instead of being considered to the needs of artists, it was kind of just like, that's how it is. So I think that just overall, I'll keep saying that these contracts need a lot of work, and I think collaboration with consultants, non-white male consultants that are actually valued and taken into consideration.
If you would.
Well, again, part of the work of the Esperanza is to do this thing called cultural grounding, right? Because of colonization, we hate ourselves for being Latino, Black, Asian, Arab, Native. We hate ourselves for being women, queer. It's from the beginning, right? And it's through media. It's what our parents learned, so they give it back to us. How many people grew up here as Mexican American, Chicano, Latinx, and your parents might have spoken Spanish, but they got slapped, they got their mouths washed out with joy. The soap, that's from one of our artists, yeah. So you then stop speaking Spanish and don't even talk about the indigenous languages, 2 or 3 generations before that. So So yeah, there's shame, just shame for existing, shame for the way we look, shame for our names, for the curly hair, or for whatever, right? And so that's where we come, so part of our work is to just challenge that. And that's why this space was to bring all our identities as one, rather than, you know, being split off. Over here I'll do my cultural work, over there I do my thinking and scholarly work, over here I work, you know. So that's part of where it starts. It starts from when we're born, and, you know, oh, eres prietita, oh, blanquita, we're gonna take, you know, all of that is really hard, and we learn it, right? So again, as I talk about other cultural centers of color, when it's like, we're the women, or say the Contemporary Art Month exhibit that took place how many years ago, and was at the Guadalupe, and they were all white women, and there was a controversy there. It's like, really, in the city with, you know, 65-70% Mexicana, Chicana women, and another, you know, 7% black women, and this is what we got. So that there was that moment also that happened, and so even as women, how do we also challenge our own racist attitudes too, or privileges, right? And then I was going to say something else. Oh, and I was just going to say, the city shouldn't do any programming of any art because we can't be censored, period. And as you've given examples, and I'm surprised that you all are taking money, but it's good because you can work with other organizations and not the city. But the city, we're concerned that they're taking money and then they're doing all the censoring. So many stories of artists that have been presenting at Plaza de Armas and Centro de Artes, and I remember walking with somebody, they said, this is a trilogy, and it's like, but there are only 2 pieces. What happened to the 3rd piece? And it's like, oh well, we had to get rid of that one. And it's like, but the artist allowed for that, and there was no controversy, but that happens so much, so we have to really challenge that, and then continue to support places like us, these places, or create new places as well. Did you want to answer that? You're allowed.
I'm not sure I can answer the question, but I did want to make a comment that you're right. It's not just the way that we are trained. It's also inherent in the structure, the social structure where we live, that sends that message that we then internalize. So the internalized racism and the internalized censorship, it's kind of inbred. It's there. How do we dismantle that? How do we decolonize? How do we uncensor ourselves? That's the trick. And I think places like the Esperanza, conversations like this one, where we actually ponemos el dedo en la llaga, we touch that wound, we open it up, we heal it. That's my comment.
Thank you. And I do feel like this is a place for healing. So when does a provocative artwork raise to a public issue in San Antonio? I've been here for 25 years, and I've seen moments where it raises to an issue, and I've seen other moments when nobody blinks an eye. What is it about the artwork? What is it about its intersectionality with religion, with gender, race, culture, age, queerness? What is it in San Antonio that raises a provocative exhibition or artwork to a public issue? And Graciela, I would like to start with you on this one. Provocative art.
I mean, I think, you know, Norma kind of mentioned, you know, the fear of losing control, fear of change, fear of the unknown. But but again, that also can be taken care of through these exchanges. I know, there's an Adriana Garcia there, I don't know if she's being covered up, but I know when people come for a Noche Azul concert, it's like, oh, what is that, you know? But, you know, some people want to cover it or not, but it's like, no, and then after a while it becomes normal, and it just is, right? I mean, me coming out as a lesbian as a 22-year-old to my mom, it was scary for her, but it didn't mean like she pushed me away. Just when I learned a little bit more, it was her fear for me, right? That I was going to be hurt. And she was right, I would continue to be hurt. But, and like around the defunding and the attacks, they were serious, right? So nowadays we talk about social media and people attacking them. That's ugly because it's a lot of anonymity, but we were getting physically, like, people, you know, and they're you know, like I was afraid of white men when I would go into the airplane and airports because that's what was attacking me here locally. And physically putting their bodies just, you know, inches away from me.
You also had newspaper attacks.
Well, there was the Express News attacking all the time. So we had like Laura Aguilar, and she had, you know, big brown bodies all over the place. And we had an amazing. She just died a few years ago, and now that she's passed away, now all these, you know, now she's well known and world renowned. She was then while she was alive, but while she was here, we had Roddy Stinson making sure to attack us, the cartoonist Nacho Guarache attacking. And, you know, so that helped to get the news, our leaders, our city leaders, turn around and turn against us. So even council members, before they were running, would come here and say, can we speak? Can we write in your newsletter? And then 100 days later, we're defunding us and saying, well, my God says I can't, right? And so I talked to the minister and he told me how to vote on this. And it's like, what? You know, you're a commie. What are you talking about? But so it's that fear amongst those leaders and their power and their interest in continuing to move up. So, you know, I mean, we have people who defunded us, Senator Menendez, you know, who are Democrats, and now they're really good on issues of LGBT stuff. But back in 1996, 97, 98, they were on right-wing radio saying we wanted to fund this organization. And I remind them, I mean, it's like, I'm not going to forget. I've forgiven. You have to forgive, because otherwise you kill yourself if you don't let it go. But yeah, they're making mistakes, and we have to remember the right wing is really organizing because they are afraid of the power we have gained. You know, affirmative action. You know, that's how women and people of color got into the university, and it's been under attack forever. You know, the Roe v. Wade, 50 years later, where are we? You never thought that that would disappear, those rights, right? Going back, you know, into the closet. That's all happening, so they're just trying to take it back, and they're gonna find these places, these wedge issues to divide us, these wedge issues that allow for the fear to take place. And so we have to remember that we have to be in solidarity with each other. And even though I might not be queer, I might not be a woman, I might not be, you know, dark-skinned, that we have to be in solidarity with one another, because we won't win unless we work together and continue to support each other. Thank you.
We are running a little bit long. I don't know if we want to go on to another question or or open up to audience. Open up to audience. Okay, so we're going to open up to audience questions right now. If you have anything that you would like to ask directly to one of our panelists, please, there will be a mic being passed around. Please keep your question directed to somebody on the panel and make it brief if possible so we can get a few people to ask questions.
And I've been instructed to hold on to the microphone, so it's not you, it's me, but I will hold on to it.
Graciela. We've known each other for a long time, but you said something that I thought was interesting when you were talking to the other two ladies on the panel, about accepting, like allowing your art to be shown, even if you have to compromise. I don't know if that's the best word to use. But I think that what's missing is that if you don't have a lot of money, if you are not upper class, it's very hard to do art. You know, Ms. Fox, I mean, she's a single mother with a child. I mean, it's a luxury to be, to have that standard, I guess is what I would say. And I'm not trying to be rude to you, but I think it's a luxury to say, I'm going to hold to my guns and lose money when you have rent and childcare. That's what I would say.
Thank you.
about.
Would you like a comment from Sarah and from Graciela?
Well, I was wondering what Graciela was going to say, because she had mentioned that she was surprised that they were still taking the money from the city, even though they were being censored, I guess.
Well, I said it, and again, historically, the city started giving funding to individual artists back in 1990 or 91, and then the attacks at the cultural wars of the 1990s, suddenly they disappeared, and there was like, what happened? When did that happen? Who made that decision? And that was, again, city administrators just making that decision. And it did take Marisela Barrera and other artists to, challenge and get funding. But I'm amazed, for the 200, 300-page contracts that public artists are having to sign. We caught some of this that also said, you can't be pro-Palestine, you can't attack Israel. And it's like, I scratched that out and said, we're not taking your money, right? Then people got a little nervous and they said, okay, well, we can scratch that out for you all. So I do think you should take the money, absolutely. We're taxpayers, and we need to challenge it. So no, I think it's a good thing they did it, and I think we just need to push harder to make sure that they should just have to sign a 2-page contract and say, we're going to create this piece of artwork, and by the end of the year, se acabó, and pay us our $5,000, $10,000. They should be getting a lot more choice of money.
Artistic freedom.
Yeah. So I take that.
I think it's also just shows that it's not black and white, right? Like, we can all have these things we're against, but in the end we live in this capitalist system that we're struggling to survive, and it's like we have to make compromises, and unfortunately those don't always align with what we believe in, and it's like, that's what we're working on, right?
This question's for Sarah Fox. Do you feel like the decision kind of changed after you introduced the male member into your exhibit? Because I feel like it's okay for white men to draw whatever they think, a woman is, but when we start, depicting men in our art, they get a little uptight, so I want to know if you felt like the decision changed after you introduced that into the exhibit.
I think I hit less resistance when I was a woman making work about women's bodies, and I think there is more blowback because I'm making work, not only using men's bodies, but sometimes poking a little fun at them too, and the puppet show was an angry puppet show, and the fox died at the end. So I think that they didn't like that. They didn't. I don't know if there was a specific scene, if it was exactly because the fox was anatomically correct, or what happened. I think women making work about sex, we get in trouble for that. I wrote a little bit about this, but that female desire and sexuality, where we're living now, the government, it can only exist with the man's permission and an answer to male needs. That seems to be the only way that sexuality is acceptable by the powers that are in charge. And I think that I put this somewhere. And that all of this is about control, and that a woman who expresses her desire and owns her own sexuality, and in my case that was doing different types of bodies, but men's bodies too, is a direct threat to that system of power. And that men use shame, and they will use censorship. They'll create laws that limit family planning and a woman's control over her own body. And it goes back to what Norma was saying at the beginning, that all of this comes from the threat of change and from the threat of a loss of power.
Sarah, if you could let people know where your show is, because you can still see the artwork itself.
Yeah, so the show is at the Blue Star Complex. It's in Unit 136, which is the very far left. But I'm also going to put the work online. I have one more show that it needs to go to, and then the work will be available online, so anyone can see it at the end of May.
The director of the McNay, Rich Asti, as well as the chief curator and curator of contemporary art at the McNay, Renee Barrio, are both gay men. So because of the fact that these two gay men, ultimately had the decision to, remove you from this situation, how does that make you feel in terms of, your disinvolvement with this whole thing? And also, I know for a fact that they asked for the commission back, so although they paid you to make all of this work for over a year, and then once they disinvited you from the show, they said, no, we want our money back, and that includes the other artists as well who walked away from this situation. So I think yes, as a second aside to all of this discussion, yes, we get paid, you definitely get paid to create this work, but then after having created it, and then they ask for their money back, how does that make you feel as well?
So I do have to clarify, they never asked for their money back from me because if I pulled my work out, I would have to give the money back. If they pulled my work out, I got to keep the money. That being said, it was not that much money that they gave me to make this work. I ended up getting outside funding. It was $1,000 for a year's project. Where I paid 4 people, so that's why I applied for the grant, and I got the grant. The grant helped me pay for it and pay the people that are generous enough to work with me. But yeah, it was very frustrating having 2 gay men shut me down because I felt like there should be some solidarity and standing up for people's different sexualities, and I still in the end felt like it was 2 men silencing me.
I was going to say, being gay doesn't mean you're progressive. Being a woman, being a person of color, right?
Okay, hi. I know everybody on the panel. It's good to see you all here and hear your experiences. I feel like when you were talking about the beginning of where erasure starts, it's like what Graciela said, it starts at birth, and I think it starts at birth with bad education, right? And that bad education comes from white male education, gay or hetero. I don't like to say straight, hetero. So, it's where it starts. So it's a white male philosophy, Western philosophy is a white male perspective, a narrow one. And so I feel like even in this instance of, bringing up those questions about, it's because it was a male body depicted, so you're challenging male representation, white male representation, right? Which is patriarchy. We get taught that as men of color, queer included. And then that other question about, these 2 gay men stuff, they came in, they canceled you, or tried to. They're still following, it's that wedge issue thing that Graciela was talking about, where white men are behind the scenes like puppet masters, playing all these issues against each other, everyone they marginalize. And then on the outside, if we're not invested, if we're not looking back, like they tell us to keep looking forward together, don't look back. If we're not looking back, then we're here thinking like, it's gay men, it's just men attacking, other marginalized men attacking women, and it's white men behind the scenes laughing all the way to the bank, and then using white women, the women from their communities, as the voice and kind of handing out money and guarding everything, Like that's really what's at work, and I've experienced this. I'm here going on a rant because I was very traumatized before these events happened by the art institutions for challenging white power. White women and men included. The director of art pays his wife. They came for me hard with the media. The way McNay called the media on Sarah, right away to try to control the narrative. So my question now, after that, is it kind of directed at Kathy, who I respect her work. I've worked with her before. She's great, but I do see where fear kind of operates in the hearts of white women who have influence, and I don't understand that fear completely because it's not my experience. I don't come from those demographics or communities. But I wonder how much fear operates in the family of white women and fear and being afraid to challenge the men in their communities. And what are the fears, what are the implications of challenging them to hand over power, hand over money, be accountable. Because a lot of what I experienced in the situation with me with Blue Star was white women protecting white men behind the scenes. They disappear, they hightail it, and the women have to deal with the consequences of it. And we're all fighting each other, you know, and there's no solidarity. So anyways, Kathy, what do you think that fear is? Being associated with women of these demographics, because a lot of it is conservative white women who are censoring books.
So I'm a moderator today, not necessarily one of the panelists. So I'm not sure how to answer that, except that as a feminist, women are always brought into a situation where they can have power over them. Online right now, more men are attacking women online. And that is a really unsafe place for women. In the other days, it might have been through newspapers or behind the scenes, but right now, it is, there are some very difficult situations that can happen online with bullying, and you know, we try to make the best community we can. So I'm going to ask for another question now.
I was just wondering if there's any statistics on artists that are being censored by the city of San Antonio, like as far as like men and women. It seems to me like a lot of times that women artists people will use any excuse to censor or discredit women artists. And I was just wondering if anybody's maybe keeping track or archiving those incidents.
I think we do need to collect an archive. There are cards on each of your seats where we're asking you to tell your story if you have a situation. Those cards will become part of the archive here at Esperanza. I think it's also important to look through, as participating in the art scene for over 25 years, for many more years, we all are responsible for remembering what has happened and for keeping those stories and for helping to move us forward.
Any more questions? And I was just going to say, in terms that we've talked a lot about women and sexuality and queerness, but I do also want, you know, after we got defunded, after we won, like we did a whole year around Palestine, because, you know, we had just gone to war and it was the Middle East, it was, you know, and Rachel Corrie had gotten bulldozed when she was in Palestine by an Israeli tank, right? So the community came to the Esperanza, and we, you know, one artist wanted to have a one-woman show, and I said, no, let's spend time doing more, right? So we expanded and it became a full year, and one of that Palestinian artists, you know, put up her exhibit, and we had, you know, we brought in the media, tried to talk about it, and the rabbi right next door started attacking us and saying we were anti-Semitic, right? And we had done a good job of having our Jewish allies, our Palestinian allies, and they wrote op-ed pieces. You know, but I remember Phil Harburger, our mayor, saying, don't be doing art that, you know, is about 2,000 miles away. You know, it's like, wait a minute, we're having a war and our kids are going to fight over there. But he was ready to defund the Esperanza, so that was, you know, one thing. You know, when we showed films about Cuba, it was Fresa y Chocolate, it was about talking about the queer in Cuba, and it was amazing to see a film when, you know, we had heard that Fidel Castro was homophobic and all, and there was this film that, you know, long lines to get into the theaters in Cuba, because finally they were talking about LGBT stuff, and Fidel Castro ate from the chocolate and the fresa, and so that, you know, you never knew where he stood on the issue. But we had people demonstrating outside because we were doing something that was pro-Cuba. So, you know, just remember, it's all these complexities, and people are getting attacked on a lot of these. And I would say that women are more courageous. We've already, you know, we've been beaten as women, and then if you're a woman of color, you've been double beaten, and then if you're queer, triple. So we have all these oppressions, and I think, again, how do you survive if you have to just be honest to yourself? And I think we just, that gives us the courage to be bold, to say, okay, even if we get defunded, even if we get attacked, we're going to do it because it's our truth, and if we can't speak our truth, then why are we even living and in existence, right? So otherwise, boom, that's the only thing that can happen. So I think this is the way we resist and we react and we empower, and then we move forward, and then we'll be attacked in 25 more years and we continue to come back. That's how we make change.
And I think we were at the end of our audience questions, so I know you had one more question you wanted to ask each of the panelists, and just, or not. That's why I'm not the moderator.
We're at 8 o'clock. I really just want to thank the bold women who are up here with me. I want to thank Norma Cantu, Graciela Sánchez, Suzy González, and Sarah Fox. These women are brave and wonderful and talented. Thank you also to the Veronica Center, to Sarah Hart, and to Stephanie Alfrocha. Thank you.
Are there still tamales? So if you still didn't have any tamales, they're really delicious. Take some. We're not kicking you out just exactly right now.
Okay.
And thanks for being here.
Oh, Graciela.
Oh, and we want to thank Blanca Rivera for the tamales.
I am very into the
culture. I am very, very into all of these things. So I'm gonna try to put together something. But you don't have time to listen to my words. Thank you, and you too. Okay. Thank you.